A very good day to all our viewers and Salam Sejahtera. My name is Paul Gabriel and today's discussion is on GE15, the battle for Putrajaya. The electoral battle lines have been drawn and we are into the third day of official campaigning with political temperatures already rising. At the close of nominations, there were 945 candidates vying for the 222 parliamentary seats, the biggest ever field of contestants. All 166 parliamentary seats in the peninsula will see a free-for-all between Barisan Nasional, Pakatan Harapan, Perikatan Nasional, and there is also Gerakan Tanah Air now. My guests today are two well-known Malaysians, one a veteran journalist who writes with conviction on issues of national importance, and the other a prolific writer-thinker who focuses on politics and public policy in Malaysia. Welcome aboard, Datuk Seri Wong Chun, editorial advisor of The Star, and Ms. Dr Tricia Yeoh, CEO of the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, better known as IDEAS. I want to thank the both of you for taking the time to be with me today.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
Chun, you were on the beat during nomination day, getting a feel of things on the ground. I feel one good thing about being journalists these days, at this particular time, there is no, we are not desperate for material at this time. May I start by asking you, Chun, your take as the campaigning picks up steam across the country. When talk of G15 first started way back in 2020, after the elected Pakatan Harapan government fell, people were just put off. But fast forward to now, there seems to be some sort of rejuvenation, a new determination on the part of voters. How do you see this?
Okay, good evening, everybody. Now, like Tricia, we are depending on the preliminary surveys. So I've gone through something like 4 surveys, 5 surveys, and I've also been going around the ground. Generally, I think that it's still very early stage. I'm taking a very guided and very cautious speculation or assessment of the ground because I will honestly say that in the GE14, I got it completely wrong. Okay, so I think even the opposition got it wrong. It was way off. After that encounter, I'm much more cautious now in how I look at things because that there are many variables, many factors which are really new to this GE15. One is that you have 3 big coalitions competing. Previously, it was almost a straight fight. And of course, we have the new voters, those only 18, which we really do not know where they go and how they stand. And also, there's a large percentage, or 20% and more, of undecided voters. Where would they go? We're also not sure. And because the Malay ground, the determining factor, the Malay ground, the important Malay voters, they are split into 3. So again, we do not know how it will go. At this point, I will just stop at this and give the way to Tricia for her comments, if you don't mind.
Yes, Tricia?
Sure. So I think that we are really entering rather unprecedented territory here, simply because of the fact that it's not really all the efforts of the parties and the coalitions that are going to determine the outcome. What's going to determine the outcome ultimately is the voter turnout. If we looked at the recent state elections of Malacca and Johor, the voter turnout was very low. And so even looking at the results of those 2 state elections as a determinant for what to expect in the GE is also a flawed one. So we cannot go by that. So all this is to say that the 5.8 million or close to 6 million new voters, because of Undi 18 and automatic voter registration, really is a wild card. If any of the parties or coalitions out there are clearly sure about the direction that this 6 million voters are going to vote towards, then they are actually not telling you the truth because no one really knows. So that's one. Second is, like I said, voter turnout. And remember that this is the first time that only 3 states are going into an election compared to the previous GEs, right, where it's a simultaneous dissolution. This is the first time only 3 states, whereas the other 10 states 4 state elections have taken place in the last few years. Next year, you're going to have 6 state elections. So whether or not this will feature in the calculations of people wanting to go home to vote now versus next year or at all, I think that really plays into how the results will be. I think historically speaking, and from the data that we've seen as well, high voter turnout usually benefits the opposition. A low voter turnout usually benefits the incumbent. So in this case, when we say incumbent, it would be a Barisan Nasional or / Perikatan Nasional incumbent. Those 2 factors are already really strong. The third factor is the floods. So there are a lot of predictions already about floods. I think behind me, I think there's a thunderstorm looming as I speak. So these 3 things makes it really unpredictable, and I think pundits are going to have a really tough time calling the outcome.
Yes, I share the assessment like Tricia. It makes it really because of so many unpredictable factors. So this time is going to be really interesting. If we look at the figures that's been reflected, I give an example. The concerns, and this is right across all surveys. The number one concern of Malaysians in this election is that the cost of living, economic factors, job security, political stability. This ranks very high on what the voters want. But if you listen to the charamas and the rhetorics by our politicians, regardless of where they stand, I am actually quite disappointed after day 3 or day 2. I'm still listening to the old political rhetorics. I call you name, you call me name. The kind of rhetoric. But it doesn't look like any of the politicians are addressing or talking about how they are going to take Malaysians through a very difficult 2023. How are they going to tackle the economics, the uncertainty that lies ahead? Perhaps that economics is not an issue that attracts the audience at the Charama. People like to hear, they call it parting shots and name calling, but this is not happening. So for me, I do not know whether politicians are really hearing the grievances and the voices of the rakyat. So most of my colleagues in the Penang and elsewhere, they have been sending me pictures of really charamas which are not well attended. So I do not know, Tricia, are people getting fed up? There's a political fatigue, or just people do not care anymore? Do you sense that kind of perception or sentiment?
Well, I don't know. I mean, nominations, they seem to be quite colorful and well attended, but that's of course the hardcore, right?
Yep.
Like the supporters themselves. The rest of the society, I mean, COVID is another reason possibly that people are not going out to actually attend the charamas. And I think also we need to be cautious that there's a tendency, I think we have that tendency of assuming that a large turnout at the charama also means really strong support in that area, and vice versa, right? Whereas, for example, we know that Barisan Nasional's very, very hardcore, traditional, age-old campaign tactics that have worked very well are not charamas, but actually going door to door. And they have like very detailed, granular information about each household, who the support is, and so on. So I think sometimes attendance at charama may not be a really good gauge, especially post-pandemic. I think it's hard to tell whether or not, many people are following online, for example. But going back to your so 2 points, right? Number one, voter fatigue. I think there is going to be a likelihood of voter fatigue, especially as we are going to see from now on, in every 5-year period, 4 out of the 5 years, there will be some form of elections and only 1 year of break because of the various state elections. So I think voter fatigue can be real. It's really up to the politicians to be able to incentivize their voters and supporters, to excite them, to talk about local issues and bring them out, right? Bring out the vote. So that's on them, right? That's their responsibility to do. And of course, organizations like our civil society, we want to make people exercise their vote responsibly as well. But the second point, going back to what you said about the economy, I said this to a group recently that yes, it's about the economy, it's about job opportunities and cost of living. Never mind that actually our employment rates are supposed to be, back to normal and restored, but that's not the case. That's not what people are feeling, right?
Yep.
if you look at two manifestos have come out so far, the PH manifesto and the PN manifesto. There is some reference to the economy, obviously jobs, cost of living and so on. But whether or not that's translating to what they're saying on stage and in Ceramah, that's probably a less sexy thing to be able to, garner support from. But I must say this for at least one of the parties, which is Muda. So to Muda's credit, from what I can recall, that's something consistent that the leader, Syed Saddiq, has been able to talk about consistently throughout, right? So he has always talked about opportunities for the young. He himself being of that generation is able to encapsulate the sentiment, the feelings of young people today. Even if there are jobs, like what kinds of jobs are we talking about? Quality jobs, jobs of the future, sustainable jobs and so on. So yeah, just those 2 points for now.
Yeah, talking about the manifestos, you mentioned two parties have announced. I think Perikatan Nasional announced last night. Tonight will be Barisan Nasional announcing. But Chunwai, how much do voters actually care about these public declarations of policy and aims? Do they, people want to listen to the simple message, the big picture. What do you think after what happened the last time? Pakatan Harapan said the manifesto was not carved in stone.
It's a good question. I mean that I do not know who actually craft this manifesto. They probably have a team. And how much attention do the voters really bother? Okay, or they actually read through the this entire manifesto. And we all know that Dr. Mahathir famously said that the manifesto is not a holy book. Okay, and that there was no need to follow it. So I find this very depressing because that we already know that many politicians do not keep their promise, okay? But when it comes to this stage where you tear up your manifesto, so is there any reason for us to even actually want to take this manifesto seriously? We know that we have come to a point, even before the first vote has been put into the ballot box, even before the nomination of candidates were announced, we all know that politicians have been talking of deals. What happens after the generation? What kind of deal should we do? What kind of coalition should we form? What kind of, I call it, what kind of loose shall we form, okay? Who should get, we have come to this point. So I find it very depressing that whether these manifestos are worth anything. We all know that in Malaysia, statutory declarations means nothing. It looks like manifestos also mean nothing. I'm sorry, I'm very critical here because I'm very cynical of this whole process. So I'm of this generation that who thinks that, well, convincing me more, you have 11 days or 12 days, tell me more why I should vote for you. Sorry, I'll come to this point.
Okay, maybe on that point, like if I can provide a slightly differing view, because it's always good, right, to have your panelists having differing views.
Yes.
So I think on the manifesto, your question, right, Paul, was do people care about it? I think following what happened in 2018, or rather, after its fall, people seem to care about it when the promises are not delivered, right? So to me, that's already a positive thing that people were paying attention to some of the promises that were being made in the manifesto. For the longest time, we fought for policy-oriented politics to happen. In the past, it didn't matter so much because it was just a single party rule in the federal government up to 2018. So it didn't matter so much. I would say that it's really good that people put pressure on the parties, and it really has made PH, for example, re-examine how much they're willing to put into their manifesto. And you can see this manifesto is not as detailed as the last time. It's more, overarching, broader, like hitting at the more important notes. So it does make politicians change the way they behave, and that itself should be considered a good thing. The pressure changes the way they behave and the way they come up with their promises. So that's one. The other issue to address, though, correctly, as Dr. Chun has pointed out, which is that what happens if you have a coalition that comes together after the election, which doesn't represent at all any of the coalitions that have emerged with their manifestos. So you have right now a PH, PN, a BN manifesto. So you have 3 manifestos. What if the new government that comes in is actually a coalition that is cobbled together from various different parts of the coalition, which book then do you actually refer to in order to keep them to their promises? So I think that's the more important question to have. And if that's the case, then I think that as voters and as concerned citizens, we should hold to the higher standard than the lower standard. So we take the higher standard. If it's, for example, a BN plus PN coalition, then we combine the two and say, like, look, this is what you promised.
Yeah.
And if it's a different one from what you have cobbled together, tell us at the outset what is the manifesto or what is the approach that you're planning to take, at least for the first 100 days. So at least there is some bare minimum that we can hold them to accountable to.
All right, thanks. Now, looking on the war on the social media, we see that we are now practically drowning every day in messages on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter. I think there is talk that some of the parties here are even reaching out to experts overseas for help on the social media front. For example, those who helped President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s campaign in the Philippines. Tricia, is the online and social media campaign key to victory you see in this general election with Undi 18 and the millions of additional first-time young voters coming on board?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? Especially in an age of, again, a post-pandemic situation where I think there is a lower likelihood of people wanting to go to the ground. Social media is really where the campaign is today. 2018, it already started, right? So I called the GE in 2018 a WhatsApp election because everything was on WhatsApp. Today, that is still the case, but the information, I think the information platforms are a lot more, what's the word? It's diluted, so it's kind of fragmented into multiple platforms. TikTok is evidently going to be something that is popular with the young people. The amount of time that they spend on their handphones, for example, the amount of the number of videos that they will be watching as opposed to reading text. So I don't know if they're actually reading things like the manifesto, right? They might be listening to videos of the manifesto, but not reading the actual text. So social media will play a really important role. But I do want to address something, which is that I think we're also beginning to see the start of some like false news that are emerging on WhatsApp, and unfortunately some content that is also quite insightful in nature. And we as a community need to be really careful about that information. We need to ourselves be the arbiters of information that comes through our hands literally, and know very wisely how to further disseminate that information forward. Because, and if you bear with me a little bit, if you look at what happened in the Trump election in the US, and if you look at what happened in the Duterte election, in the Philippines, and you alluded to that as well, Paul, in the Philippines. I think Philippines really is the groundswell of a lot of this disinformation campaigns. Malaysians just need to exercise a lot of caution, a lot of wisdom in the way we carry on and pass on these messages.
Yeah, I agree, Paul. I think social media has played a great role since G14, and much more so this round. I mean, we're talking about the weather. Nobody wants to go and listen to the dramas, that's for sure. And COVID-19, so everybody's going to get their information directly from the social media, like the platform that we're having now. This is going to go to a lot of people who'll be listening to us, different views, different perspective, new voices, and I think it's really great. Of course, like Tricia says that the importance is for us to differentiate and find out what is fake, what is real, and what's not. So yesterday, I had someone sending me a poster of this very attractive lady who was supposedly going to contest against Syed Siddiq, okay? And I sent this to Syed Siddiq and said, Syed Siddiq, is this your competitor? If this is so, I think they're going to lose a lot of votes. So Syed Siddiq told me, no, she's not contesting, she's fake, okay? But that has not stopped her picture from going viral for the past 48 hours. So I think that we need to detach ourselves and find out exactly. I mean, for traditional politicians, you cannot fit in everything. You can, as I said, one size does not fit all. In many areas, your voters still want to see your face. They want to shake your hand. They want to feel your presence, or else they're going to say that, look, the candidate did not even show up. So I think it's a bit of everything.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the economy. surveys continuously show that it is the economy that matters most to the people. Merdeka Center poll famously showed 74% of the respondents listing the economy as their main concern. We can see, based on the manifestos released, that most all the parties are drumming across the economy, job creation, cost of living as the main theme. And even in their daily ceramah, they are harping on this. Tricia, what do you see? Is the message coming across from the political parties where the economy is concerned?
I think that, across the three coalitions, to be honest, there's no real differentiation as far as their economic policy is concerned. So I think that they would largely adopt pretty similar policies throughout. They might be talking about the problems of the economy, about the potential recession, about the cost of living, about employment issues, and so on. What I think is probably lacking is that they have not emerged strongly enough to offer any real solutions. We know, for example, that we've been hit with very high food prices. Inflation is at an all-time high, even though the data might indicate otherwise. What's happening with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the war, that will continue to have a ramification effect on the entire region in Southeast Asia, as well as Malaysia, already suffering from the supply chain effects of the pandemic time. And next year is not going to be any better. So I think it really is quite lacking, right? We have not heard a strong leadership call from among any of the three coalitions, taking the bull by its horns and saying, look, Malaysia, we are actually about to face a global recession next year. What more with the US-China decoupling, economic and tech decoupling, this will have an effect on us. So here's what we need to do. Okay, number one, we need to, go regional again. Malaysia can no longer afford to be myopic. We need to look at Southeast Asia as a bloc together. Let's do this. Number two, we need to shore up our, whatever industries, right? Like make sure that we go high tech in palm oil, make sure that we do our research and so on. Number three, so like laying down very clearly, this is what we're facing. It is a crisis moment. This is an opportunity. Let's get this together. So I think that in terms of solutions has been lacking. And I really do hope that we will start to see that. I mean, maybe I've seen a little bit of that from certain individuals here and there. You might see that in the form of maybe Rafizi Ramli from Keadilan talking about some economic issues. You might see that from Tengku Zafrul as the caretaker Minister of Finance. But as a bloc, that's not very apparent yet. Yeah.
I want to follow up to what Tricia has said. I agree with her 100%. Generally, there's an absence of any politicians from the bloc. We sort of can convince me and many voters, look, we know that there's going to be a very difficult time in 2023. The IMF has said that next year will be very tough. Malaysia, for example, imports its food, and the bill is staggering. We're going to pay in US dollar, and we know that the effect will be felt only next year. And we know the ringgit has depreciated more than 50%. Now, if I'm going to vote for any leader who's going to be prime minister or any bloc, I think that it makes sense that I want to be safe that this guy knows his job. He's going to take us through this difficult period, okay? Not just a finance minister, but really as a leader. Now, I really do not detect, have not seen, as I said earlier, at charamas or at any gatherings, they have actually talked about this issue, in a very dominant way. It's really, I feel the absence of the issues of economic, about food security and the safety net. It's just not there. As Tricia said, that maybe it's not sexy enough, okay? But I think that many Malaysians, okay, and we're talking about Malaysians have become very urbanized. 70% of Malaysians have access to information. And look, if the survey shows that, look, these are the concerns of the rakyat, economic, job security. How come the politicians are not talking enough? Okay, they're not talking enough. We're a little bit here and there. The manifesto that's prepared by the team, but no, I don't feel it.
The most observers do not think they don't expect any significant change in the political landscape based on the outcome of G15. I think, Tricia, you yourself have said that, I don't know whether you were one of those analysts who believed there could not be a conclusive result from G15, but I think I read somewhere you said that even without political stability, there can be economic stability. Even with political polarization, economic stability is possible. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think, as we have consistently said throughout the session so far, this is unpredictable. We don't know what the outcomes are. There's a likelihood of a hung parliament because the race is really close. But also, having said that, I think it does look possible, and this is where I'm sticking my neck out. But I'm not in the business of predictions. But I think it is still possible to envision a sort of BNPN plus GPS plus GRS/Warisan government. So this is why the seats of Sabah and Sarawak actually matter a lot. And I've said before that they really could be the potential kingmakers in this. If you look at the 5 states in which there's a highest number of member of parliament seats, that would be Sarawak, Johor, Sabah, Perak, Selangor. So Sarawak and Sabah are like, the top 3 already. So that's why ultimately it does depend on where S and GRS/Warisan decide to go to and which coalition they are most likely to cooperate with. So that's kind of talking about the predictions now. But going back to your question about what I had said, and I have said many times before, I said that in the context of the fact that even if this election may not conclusively decide a so-called stable, in the way we understand stable, right, political government as an outcome, we also need to move beyond the idea of stability, meaning that only political stability can assure us economic stability. Why I say that is because if, for example, on the day after the elections or the few days after that, there's no outcome, there's no clear government that's coming in, and even if the government that is formed, maybe via a confidence and supply agreement or an MOU number 2, the perception that people will have is that this is an unstable political government, right? We need to be able to accept that and move on, because as long as we have weak coalitions, we actually can have opportunities to push for policy-based reform, as we saw in MOU 1 under Ismail Sabri. So that can happen. And if we can also ensure that there is institutional independence and strong institutions in place, with the assurance that the rule of law is adhered to, with the assurance that policies will be carried through regardless of who sits in government, then I think that's when we can start to see that the economy will carry on. Many developed countries have periods of time where there are no governments. I think it was Hungary that had no government in place for months on end. In many developed countries, the governments change or the leadership changes, but policies remain. So I think the point I'm trying to make is, can we actually promote institutional stability over and above political stability to ensure that no matter what happens, we will have policies that stick? And I think that's the most important for us to agitate for, right?
Okay. Chun, I want to ask you on the controversy involving the big names dropped for GE15. Party heads seem to be using G15 as the perfect time to settle political scores. For Pakatan Harapan, we see new candidates in Klang, Sungai Buloh, and PJ. And the UMNO president has gone a few steps further to chop his enemies within. Chun, you wrote about this in your Sunday column, and I'd like to ask, is this the right time to get even? Or should parties be doing all they can to keep their seats and increase them even?
I think that in all political parties, they have this kind of almost similar patterns being repeated. You have candidates the problem with UMNO, for example, is that the warlord syndrome has come back to haunt them. For years, they encouraged and even tolerated these superpower warlords who treat their constituencies like their family freedom. If they cannot contest, then their children must contest. I think that all this should go. Look, you cannot be there forever. We have got enough politicians across all parties who have Tunku Razali has got how many terms? 8 terms, I don't know, more than 8. How many terms? I've lost count. He has been there all his life.
13 term, I think.
13 terms, longest serving MP. Okay, he's 80 over years old. And then you have this in Fong Kui Lun, in Tang Kok Wai. They have been there for a long time. I think that politicians who have been there for a long time should just give way to younger politicians, unless your calculation shows that, look, okay, if Tunku Razali goes away, then you can't win that seat. It has got to be Tunku Razali. Then, okay, I take a much more flexible way of that. But if it's a sure win, okay, if it's a sure win, Bukit Bintang is a sure win for DAP. I mean, you can put anybody there, that guy is going to win, okay, that woman is going to win. So why do you want to keep somebody who's been there forever? Unless that there is a political internal reasons for that. You know, all political parties have got an interest. There's a trading of power, trading of votes, okay, delegates votes to keep people in power. I don't know. But that's how I feel, that you should always let the younger people come out.
The big number of independents contesting this time. There is even a Cleopatra in the ring. Many accused Barisan Nasional and PN of being behind this to split the votes to favor them. Tricia, do you think independent candidates should be rejected?
Well, I mean, I think it's a free country and everyone should be given the right to contest should they so wish to. However, the historical record of Malaysian elections shows us that independents don't tend to do very well in Malaysia. Malaysia happens to be a country in which the political system is quite determined and dictated by the party itself. Whether that has changed because of Undi 18, we don't know yet. But in the past, people vote according to party lines mostly. And you find that actually many of the candidates who run as independents don't even get enough votes in order to secure their deposit, right? So they lose their deposit. I would say, however, that there is a case to be made for independent candidates if the sole reason for them contesting is to provide them a platform to air certain views which are not being expressed by any other party. So some examples in the past would be a long time ago, there was something called the Women's Initiative, and they put forward a candidate who was female, and she spoke about the importance of gender representation. Her name was Tony Kasim, and then following that, I think we saw a lot more female candidates being fielded by various political parties. Another good example would be parties that are talking about more niche issues like green or environmental issues, where they want to talk about climate change, which maybe is not the forte of all the other parties. So platforming is a possible reason to do that, where you can have a national platform to talk about these otherwise neglected issues. But if independent candidates believe that they can actually win, then I would say that that's probably a misinformed view. And I think not just talking about independence, which is your question, but the bigger question of multi-corner fights, right? So in this election, you see like unprecedented multi-corner fights. You've got 10 candidates in Batu, you have 9 candidates in Ampang. What will this actually do to the parties? I think it's a really interesting time to see also how this changes, number one, party strategy. How do they change their campaigning? And number two, to examine how voters vote, right? So do voters vote in order to see their preferred party win, or do they vote in order to see their least liked party, have a reduction in terms of its votes? So, these two things explored widely in literature around the world, but we haven't had enough case studies, and this election will be a very good case study.
Okay, Paul, I want to add on to what Tricia has said. I think that having a lot of independence are really good. It shows the maturity of democracy in Malaysia, because we're still on a transitional process, okay? But it means that the more people feel that they should take part in politics, not just these established parties. They feel that, well, we can be the alternatives. And perhaps they learned that, look at Prabhakaran. He was a 22-year-old student, and then he entered Nawal. He has become an MP, and he even knocked out Tian Chua, okay, who is a seasoned politician from Batu PKR division. Now, I think what people do not realize is that in the UK, we talk about Conservative Party and Labour Party, but actually, there are a lot of independents who take part in this election. It's just that the media totally shut them down. They're shut out. You don't see these candidates being given any space in the media, but they actually have independent candidates in UK and multi-corner fights. In the US, people talk about Republican and Democrat. I mean, Ralph Nader, right? I think the name is Ralph Nader, Tricia, right? He's been trying so hard to be the third voice, but look, the media doesn't give him any voice. So actually, there should be more than two options. That's my view. And now we've got three options and more in Malaysia. The more, the merrier, so to speak.
Can we talk about Anwar Ibrahim and his the Pakatan strategy of putting Perak as its frontline state and moving Anwar to contest in Tambun? Did this move catch you guys by surprise? Were you surprised that Anwar moved to Perak, and Perak is the frontline state for Pakatan Harapan? They seem to have a very good feel that they can capture Perak this time.
Well, I think it's a calculated risk. It makes sense. If you look at the DAP, they started by using Penang as their frontline state. They started with Tanjung 1, Tanjung 2, and Penang was declared the frontline state for the DAP to move the wave and the momentum. When we have somebody like Lim Kit Siang who went out to contest to take on the big guns, so it created the excitement. So in the case of Perak, don't forget that the PH, they had their chance to become the Menteri Besar. It is always a state that is always very fluid, and it makes sense for Anwar to be the factor to move the excitement there. Well, he got nothing to lose. We see politicians running from constituency to constituency. It's already quite norm. So I think it makes sense for him to lead the contest there. That's my view. Tricia, you got any views on that?
No, yeah, I think I agree on this point actually, because you mentioned 2008, Pakatan made a big move in Penang, and then in 2018, they made a big move in Johor, and then they won it actually, right? Which is actually an UMNO stronghold. And so this time they're going for, well, the state that is a very, very hotly contested state. The history of Perak is very clear. 2008, Pakatan won, and then fell because of the coup to Barisan. 2013, Barisan won. 2018, Pakatan won. So it really is one of those swing states, and I think rightly so, all the media attention is going to Perak. So I think, yeah, I don't disagree here. I think Anwar's move to go to Tambun is to bring the excitement there, is to bring the fervor that, okay, we can win Perak state back again. And if they do, then this will also provide them the momentum. So even if Pakatan Harapan loses in the federal government, they win Perak state government, it will give them the necessary momentum to go into the state elections next year, because don't forget, they will be defending 3 other states. They are going to defend Penang, Selangor, and Negeri Sembilan, and that's when Barisan will really try to take over, especially Selangor. So they need the momentum. Of course, the other question is, what if he actually loses in Tambun, right? So I think that's another thing to consider.
Okay, I think we are running short of time, but I'll just slot in one question for both of you. I know you've spoken about this in the course of the interview. Who is ahead in the hearts and minds of the people? Barisan Nasional, the Prime Minister says they can win 100 seats and need 12 to cross the line. Rafizi Ramli says Pakatan can win 90 seats in the peninsula and need to work with the coalition in Sabah or Sarawak to form the federal constitution. Ladies first, Tricia, you go first. What do you think?
So, again, difficult to predict, but this is why I said that actually it's not so much about BNPN or PH, but it really is now about where Sabah and Sarawak parties will lean towards, which coalition they can work with, which prime ministerial candidate will they accept? Because if you recall, the whole mess around Sheraton move in March 2020 was precisely because of the reason of parties not being able to decide which prime ministerial candidate they can work with, right? So it is about the numbers, but it's also about who the parties will be willing to accept as the PM, as the prime minister. In a country like Malaysia, which is highly centralized, a lot of policies are determined from the top down. Prime minister's position is absolutely crucial in making the decisions, in deciding on how resources are allocated downwards to all the states. And of course, the other party to think about, which we haven't talked much about today, would be PAS, and which coalition it is that PAS would be most likely to work with. Yes, they are in Perikatan Nasional now. Would they also be willing to have a coalition with the BN? And I think the answer is probably yes. Yeah, thank you.
All right. With that, Chun, you want to say anything?
Yeah, let me give my parting shot.
Yeah.
Again, we want to rely on numbers, figures, data, and that the preliminary findings as of now is that it's almost equal, 30%, 30%, with Barisan having a slight edge compared to the others. They're slightly more than 30%. But the key to winning this election will be the Malay rural heartland. I think their call and their decision will be very important. Plus, of course, Sabah and Sarawak, as Tricia said, Sarawak will be the kingmaker. There are 31 seats up for grabs, and how many can they win? It seems like as we talk about the peninsula, we should also look at the so-called Sarawak tsunami that may happen and will play a great part in determining the outcome of GE15.
Thank you. With that, I want to thank both my panelists, Datuk Sri Wong and Dr. Tricia, for their valuable insights and the riveting things you had to say. We are ending the session, but this is no time to wind down. As they say, it ain't over till it's over. Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you very much.